Have you ever seen someone who believes they can buy anything with money, including respect? But what happens when they encounter a lesson that wealth simply can't afford? At Le Château, one of the most exclusive fine dining establishments in the heart of New York, the evening unfolds as usual, elegant, refined, and flawlessly orchestrated. Crystal chandeliers cast shimmering reflections onto silk-covered tables, while the soft clinking of silverware against porcelain plates creates a delicate symphony of luxury. At the very center of this opulent scene, a group of women sit in confident conversation, their laughter effortlessly blending with the refined ambiance. Leading the group is Victoria Lancaster, a powerhouse businesswoman whose mere presence commands attention. Adorned with dazzling jewelry and exuding an air of authority, she isn't just wealthy, she carries the arrogance of someone accustomed to being served. In Victoria's world, there are only two kinds of people: those like her, the ones in control, and everyone else, mere servants. Across the room, a young woman moves swiftly between tables, trying to keep up with the relentless pace of the evening. Lena, a newly hired waitress, pushes through her exhausting shift with a forced smile. She juggles two jobs to afford her education. But tonight, luck isn't on her side. As she carefully serves Victoria's meal, a small mistake occurs, an error so minor it could have been overlooked. But for Victoria, it is unacceptable. Harsh words slice through the air, aimed not just at the dish but at Lena herself. The humiliation unfolds before the entire room. Yet what Victoria fails to notice is that someone has been watching her every move: Alexander Hayes. The one person in the room she never expected. Lena placed the dish on the table, her hands trembling ever so slightly. She forced a professional smile and said, "Enjoy your meal." But before she could turn away, a cold voice sliced through the refined atmosphere of the restaurant. "Wait." Victoria Lancaster lifted her gaze, her sharp eyes scanning the plate before her. She arched an eyebrow in irritation, prodding the steak with her fork before setting it down with a look of disdain. "Is this how you serve food at a high-end restaurant? I ordered medium rare, and this is clearly closer to well done. Do you even understand the difference?" Lena blinked, momentarily caught off guard as she glanced at the dish. "I'm very sorry, ma'am. If there's been a mistake, I can take it back to the kitchen and have the chef prepare a new one." "Oh no, don't bother," Victoria interrupted, her voice dripping with mockery. "I'm just wondering how a place like this even hires people who can't comprehend a basic request." Her friends chuckled, their eyes gleaming as if they were enjoying a live performance meant solely for their amusement. Heat rushed to Lena's face. She had worked here long enough to know that customers could be demanding, sometimes even rude, but rarely had she ever been publicly humiliated like this. Taking a deep breath, she struggled to keep her voice steady. "I truly apologize for the inconvenience. I'll immediately—" "Oh, stop apologizing," Victoria cut her off, crossing her arms. "You'd be better off using that time to learn how to do your job properly." It's honestly disappointing how low hiring standards have fallen these days. Another round of laughter rippled through the group. A few nearby diners turned to look, some with mild curiosity, others with quiet disapproval. Lena could feel a few pitying gazes on her, but Victoria paid no attention. To her, this was nothing more than a brief moment of entertainment. Lena clenched her fists but said nothing. She simply lowered her head, lifted the plate, and hurried back toward the kitchen, desperate to disappear before the sting of embarrassment became too visible on her face. But from a quiet corner of the room, a middle-aged man in a gray suit had witnessed everything. Alexander Hayes, the owner of Le Château, set his wine glass down, his sharp eyes assessing the situation. He showed no immediate anger, no impulsive reaction, but a decision had already been made. Victoria Lancaster may have thought she was the most powerful person in the room. But what she didn't know was that tonight, she was about to learn a lesson no amount of money could ever buy. Lena hurried into the kitchen, her throat tightening with a lump she couldn't swallow. She clenched the plate in her hands, willing herself not to cry. Difficult customers weren't new to her, but there was something about Victoria Lancaster that cut deeper than anything she had experienced before. It wasn't just a complaint, it was deliberate humiliation. As if Victoria took pleasure in making her feel small. Outside, while Victoria continued chatting with her friends, one man remained quietly observant. Alexander Hayes, the owner of Le Château, sat in a discreet corner, blending almost seamlessly into the luxurious ambiance. Dressed in a simple gray suit, he attracted no attention, and that was exactly how he liked it. He had always believed that the best way to understand the restaurant he managed was to become a silent part of it, watching rather than asserting his authority in a flashy manner. Alexander was no stranger to customers like Victoria. He had seen countless people walk through the doors of Le Château, people who believed that money gave them the right to control everything, even the dignity of others. They ordered with an air of entitlement, demanded the most extravagant things, and sometimes treated the staff as if they were invisible. But this time, something made it impossible for Alexander to stay passive. Lena was not just any employee. She was his niece, a young woman full of resilience, someone he was deeply proud of. Despite his offers to support her financially, Lena had insisted on making her own way, determined to earn her education through hard work. And tonight, watching her being publicly humiliated by a woman with no compassion, Alexander knew he had to intervene. He set his wine glass down gently and rose from his seat. No one took notice of his movement, not even Victoria. Alexander strode toward the bar, where the restaurant manager stood attentively. Leaning in slightly, he whispered a few words into the manager's ear. The manager's eyes widened for a brief moment before quickly nodding, as if he had just received a critical order. Across the room, Victoria was still reveling in her moment, oblivious to the fact that her power play was about to come to an abrupt halt. And the man she had ignored, the one she had no idea was the owner of this very restaurant, was about to teach her a lesson she would never forget. Victoria Lancaster leaned back in her chair, a satisfied glint in her eyes as she took a slow sip of red wine. Around her, her friends were still buzzing about the entertaining moment from earlier, giggling as if they had just watched a short comedy act. She no longer gave Lena a second thought. To Victoria, the matter was over, but she had no idea that a storm was brewing. When Victoria and her friends requested the bill, something unusual happened. Instead of a regular server bringing the check, the restaurant manager himself approached their table. In his hands was a silver tray, holding an exquisite bottle of premium wine in a delicately sealed envelope. Victoria raised an eyebrow, slightly intrigued. "Oh, and what's this?" The manager bowed politely. "Ms. Lancaster, this is a special gift from the restaurant." One of Victoria's friends clapped her hands excitedly. "Wow, a complimentary gift? I guess this is how they show appreciation for high-class patrons." Victoria smirked, basking in her own sense of importance. Of course, a place like this should know how to treat those who truly deserve it. She reached for the envelope, about to open it, but before she could, a deep voice interrupted from right beside her. "I'm afraid you've misunderstood." The laughter around the table died instantly. The atmosphere shifted, growing heavy. Victoria snapped her head around, her expression puzzled. Standing before her was a middle-aged man in a simple gray suit, his sharp eyes calm yet commanding. Alexander Hayes. Victoria frowned slightly. She had no idea who he was, but something about his presence unsettled her. The restaurant manager gave a respectful nod. "Ms. Lancaster, this is Mr. Alexander Hayes, the owner of Le Château." The arrogance in Victoria's gaze faltered for the first time. She parted her lips to speak, but no words came out. Alexander smiled faintly, but his voice carried an undeniable authority. "I've been observing this evening, and I believe we need to have a conversation." A cold shiver ran down Victoria's spine. This was no longer a game. The atmosphere inside Le Château fell into complete silence. Conversation ceased as diners turned their attention toward Victoria Lancaster's table. No one wanted to miss what was about to unfold. Victoria straightened her posture, trying to maintain her composure. She curled her lips into a faint smirk, though her fingers tightened involuntarily around her wineglass. "Mr. Hayes, what an honor to meet you. I didn't realize the owner was dining here tonight." Alexander Hayes remained calm, but his gaze held a quiet intensity. "Yes, I have a habit of observing how my guests experience the service in my restaurant." He slowly pulled out a chair and sat across from Victoria. A brief silence stretched between them before he spoke again, his voice steady and firm. "And tonight, I witnessed how one of my employees was treated." Victoria's expression flickered for a split second before she regained her usual confidence. "Oh, if you're referring to that waitress. I was merely expecting service that matched the price I'm paying." "Surely. Customers have the right to make demands, don't they? Alexander tilted his head slightly, his eyes piercing. A customer has the right to expect good service. But no one has the right to humiliate another human being. The air at the table grew heavy. Victoria's friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier amusement now replaced with unease. Alexander continued, his gaze unwavering. Lena, the waitress you belittled, is one of the hardest working employees here. She dedicates herself tirelessly to pursuing her dreams. And more importantly, she is my niece. A jolt of shock ran through Victoria. Her eyes widened, completely caught off guard. But Alexander didn't give her a chance to recover. Money can buy an expensive meal, but it cannot buy dignity. And it certainly does not grant anyone the right to look down on those who serve them. The entire restaurant remained silent. A few patrons nodded in agreement. The admiration that once surrounded Victoria had now shifted into something else, judgment. Scrutiny. She felt an unfamiliar weight pressing down on her shoulders. This was no longer a situation she could control with a forced smile or feigned confidence. For the first time in a long while, she felt small. Alexander stood, his eyes sweeping across the room. My restaurant does not only serve fine cuisine, it upholds an essential principle, respect. And I expect every guest who dines here to understand that. Victoria could say nothing. She knew she had crossed a line, and this time, there was no way to escape the consequences. Victoria Lancaster had never experienced humiliation like this before. She sat frozen, feeling as though every gaze in the restaurant was fixed on her. But the worst part wasn't the attention, it was the silence. There was no more laughter from her friends. No admiration, no murmurs of approval. Instead, there were scrutinizing glances, disappointment, and, above all, the sinking realization that no one was on her side. Alexander Hayes remained where he stood, composed and unwavering. After a few long seconds, he tilted his head toward the restaurant manager and gave a subtle nod. The manager immediately stepped forward and picked up the expensive bottle of wine from the silver tray. This wine was originally brought as a goodwill gesture from the restaurant. Alexander said, his sharp gaze unwavering, but rather than gifting it to you, I believe it would serve a greater purpose. He turned toward Lena, who stood nearby, still hesitant, her expression a mix of uncertainty and surprise. The total amount of Ms. Lancaster's bill tonight will be donated to an organization that supports hard-working young people striving for a better future, people like my niece. A ripple of murmurs spread throughout the restaurant. Some patrons nodded in agreement, while a few even clapped softly in approval. Victoria felt heat rush to her face. She had just been humiliated in the very place where she once believed she held the most power. She opened her mouth to protest, but Alexander raised a hand, stopping her. This is not a punishment, he said firmly. It's an opportunity for you to reflect on how you treat others. Money can buy many things, but it cannot buy respect. A wave of confusion and indignation flooded Victoria's mind. No one had ever called her out so directly, especially not in public. She glanced around, searching for any sign of support, but there was none. Her friends averted their eyes, unwilling to meet her gaze. The other diners watched with quiet approval of Alexander's words, making her feel more isolated than ever. After several suffocating seconds, Victoria stood up. The air of confidence she once carried was gone. She no longer moved with the arrogance of someone in control. Her expensive heels clicked against the floor, faster, more hurried, like someone desperate to escape. Across the room, Lena was still processing everything that had just unfolded. But as Alexander turned to her and gave a small nod, she understood. He hadn't just stood up for her, he had taught her an important lesson. A person's true worth isn't measured by wealth or status, but by the way they treat others. And tonight, Victoria Lancaster had learned that lesson the hard way. Victoria Lancaster left Le Château without saying a word. The cool New York night air brushed against her skin, but it did nothing to soothe the burning humiliation inside her. Alexander Hayes' words echoed in her mind, striking at the pride she had always held so dearly. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere gradually returned to normal. Yet something had undeniably shifted. The night wasn't just about fine dining anymore, it had become a lesson that no one would soon forget. Some diners left larger tips than usual, while others exchanged knowing glances with Lena, offering silent apologies for what she had endured. In the corner of the room, Alexander simply sat back down, taking a sip of water as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But he knew that an important message had been sent, a reminder that kindness and respect could never be bought with wealth or status. Behind the counter, Lena watched the man she deeply respected, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She knew now that she wasn't alone, that someone believed in her worth, in her hard work. More importantly, she had learned that while the world could often be unfair, there would always be those willing to stand up for what was right. And Victoria? She walked away with a heavy heart. This wasn't just a bad night, it was a reckoning. For the first time in her life, she was forced to face the consequences of her arrogance. Perhaps, this would be the moment that changed her forever.